The rain fell in sheets across Mayfair that November evening, turning the cobblestones into mirrors that reflected the golden glow of carriage lamps. Inside Ravensdale House, Lady Lucinda Fairlie stood before her chamber window, watching the procession of arrivals for yet another ball she would attend but never truly join. She was 23 years old, and London had already decided her fate. The decision had been made quietly, persistently, through 1,000 small cruelties disguised as concern. A word here about her unfortunate complexion, though her skin was perfectly fair. A comment there about her lack of vivacity, though she possessed more intelligence than half the debutantes who giggled their way through the season. The architecture of her erasure had been built brick by brick, and the primary architects lived under this very roof. Lucinda! Her stepmother's voice cut through the evening like breaking glass. You cannot possibly wear that gown to the Ashworth ball. Lady Clarice Montjoy swept into the room without knocking, as was her habit. She had been beautiful once, and remnants of that beauty clung to her features like morning frost that refused to melt. But bitterness had carved lines around her mouth that no amount of French powder could conceal. She had married Lucinda's father, the late Lord Fairlie, expecting a life of continued admiration and social triumph. Instead, she had inherited a stepdaughter who reminded her daily that she was not the First Lady Fairlie, and never could be. "The gown is appropriate for the occasion," Lucinda said quietly, her hands folded before her. The dress in question was a modest creation in dove grey, elegant in its simplicity, but deliberately understated. It was precisely the sort of gown her stepmother preferred she wear, visible enough to avoid scandal, unremarkable enough to avoid attention. "It will have to do, I suppose." Lady Clarice circled her like a predator examining wounded prey. "Though I cannot imagine why you insist on attending at all. The Ashworths invited Celestine specifically. Your presence is merely tolerated." The words were designed to wound, and they found their mark. But Lucinda had learned long ago not to flinch. Flinching only encouraged them. "Nevertheless, I shall attend." She kept her voice level, her expression serene. This was her armor, the absolute refusal to give them the satisfaction of her pain. Her stepsister chose that moment to glide through the door, a vision in crimson silk that must have cost more than Lucinda's entire wardrobe. Lady Celestine Ravensdale had inherited her mother's beauty and refined it into a weapon. Golden curls framed a face of porcelain perfection, and her blue eyes sparkled with an intelligence that served only one purpose: the advancement of Celestine Ravensdale. "Oh, Lucinda," Celestine said with mock sympathy dripping from every syllable. "You're not still hoping to catch a gentleman's eye, are you? Darling, we've discussed this. You're simply not the sort of woman men remember. You're the sort they dance with out of pity before returning to someone more substantial." "Celestine speaks truth, even if indelicately," Lady Clarice added. "Perhaps it would be kinder to simply acknowledge your limitations. Not every woman is meant for marriage. Some are destined for more practical pursuits." The implication hung in the air like smoke. They wanted her to disappear into the role of perpetual spinster, the forgotten daughter who would eventually fade into the background of their lives, managing their household affairs while they collected their triumphs. But Lucinda had no intention of vanishing. She had spent 6 years being pushed into shadows, and she had learned to see things that people in the light never noticed. She had learned that the ton's attention was fickle and performative, that beauty without substance was merely decoration, and that the most dangerous thing a woman could possess was not a pretty face, but a mind that never stopped calculating. "I'm ready to depart when you are," was all she said. The carriage ride to the Ashworth residence was an exercise in studied silence. Celestine occupied herself with her reflection in a small hand mirror, making minute adjustments to her already flawless appearance. Lady Clarice stared out the window with the expression of someone perpetually disappointed by the world's failure to adequately worship her. Lucinda watched the rain-soaked streets and thought about her mother. Lady Margaret Fairlie had died when Lucinda was 7, succumbing to a fever that swept through London that winter. The memories had softened with time, but Lucinda clung to fragments, her mother's laugh, warm and genuine, the way she read poetry aloud, giving each word its proper weight, the absolute certainty in her voice when she told Lucinda that intelligence was a gift, not a burden, and that the right person would recognize it as such. "The right person will see you, darling," her mother had said during one of their last conversations, "not the version others expect you to be, but who you truly are. And when that happens, you must have the courage to be seen." Her father had grieved deeply, withdrawing into his library and his parliamentary duties. When he remarried 2 years later, Lucinda had hoped for warmth, for family, for some restoration of the home her mother's death had hollowed out. Instead, she had gained Lady Clarice and her daughter from a previous marriage, and the house had filled with a different kind of cold. The Ashworth ball was already in full swing when they arrived. The mansion blazed with candlelight, and music spilled out into the rain-washed night. Inside, the cream of London society swirled in their elaborate dance, each interaction carefully choreographed, each smile calculated, each word weighted with meaning that went far beyond its surface. Lady Clarice and Celestine were immediately absorbed into a cluster of admirers. Lucinda drifted toward the periphery, taking up her customary position near a column that provided an excellent view of the ballroom while keeping her partially obscured. She had perfected this art, present but not prominent, visible but not demanding attention. She watched the social machinery at work with an anthropologist's detachment. There was Lady Pemberton, desperately trying to secure an advantageous match for her rather plain daughter. Lord Hartwick, gambling debts mounting, circling the heiresses like a shark. The Honourable Miss Whitmore, recently returned from the continent, with scandalous stories she would never be foolish enough to confirm. And everywhere, the undercurrent of ambition, need, and careful performance. "You see them all quite clearly, don't you?" The voice came from beside her, masculine and warm with amusement. Lucinda turned and found herself looking at a man she didn't immediately recognize, a rarity in a society where everyone knew everyone, at least by sight and reputation. He was tall, with dark hair that refused to stay properly ordered, and eyes that seemed to catalogue details with the same observational intensity she employed. His evening clothes were impeccable, but worn with an ease that suggested comfort rather than vanity. There was something in his posture that spoke of confidence earned rather than inherited, though the signet ring on his hand suggested aristocratic lineage. "I'm not certain what you mean," Lucinda said carefully. "I think you are." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I've been watching the watchers tonight, and you're the only person in this ballroom who's actually paying attention. Everyone else is too busy performing to notice the performance." It was such an unexpected observation that Lucinda found herself responding honestly before she could think better of it. Observation requires less energy than participation. Or perhaps more of the right kind of energy. He studied her with open curiosity. "I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm contemplating asking this young lady to dance, I hope," interrupted an older gentleman with silver hair and a military bearing. "Julian, you cannot monopolize the most interesting woman at the ball before even the first waltz." The younger man, Julian, laughed. "Uncle, your timing remains impeccable as always." "Lady Lucinda Fairley," the older man said, with a bow that suggested he knew exactly who she was. "I had the honour of serving with your late father in the House of Lords. Charles was a good man and a brilliant strategist. I was deeply sorry to hear of his passing last year." Something in Lucinda's chest tightened. Her father's death had been sudden, a heart seizure in his study one ordinary Tuesday afternoon. The grief had been complicated, tangled with regret for the relationship that had withered after her mother's death, when he had retreated so far into himself that she could never quite reach him. "Thank you," she managed. "He spoke highly of his colleagues." "Did he?" The gentleman's eyes were kind. Then he had excellent taste in company, as his daughter clearly inherited his discernment. "Allow me to introduce my nephew properly. This is Julian Montclair, Duke of Thornbury. Julian, Lady Lucinda Fairley, whom you were correctly attempting to engage in conversation before I so rudely interrupted. Duke." The word rearranged everything. Lucinda had heard of the Duke of Thornbury, of course. Everyone had. He had inherited the title unexpectedly 3 years prior, when his elder brother died in a riding accident. By all accounts, he had been travelling extensively since then, managing far-flung estate matters and avoiding the marriage-minded machinations of the ton. His return to London this season had been noted but not yet fully exploited by ambitious mothers and their daughters, and he was speaking to her. "The interruption was hardly rude, Uncle," Julian said, his eyes never leaving Lucinda's face, "though I confess I'm now torn between following your suggestion and continuing our conversation. Lady Lucinda, might you help resolve my dilemma? Would you prefer to dance or continue our discussion of social observation?" It was a test, Lucinda realized. He was offering her a choice that most gentlemen would never extend, the option to decline the expected performance in favor of genuine interaction. And the way he phrased it suggested he would be equally content with either answer. "I find I'm curious about your own observations," she said. "You mentioned watching the watchers. What conclusions have you drawn?" His smile widened. "That most people are so afraid of being seen as they truly are, that they exhaust themselves maintaining an elaborate fiction. And that you, Lady Lucinda, have dispensed with the fiction entirely, which makes you either very brave or very tired of pretending." "Perhaps both," she said quietly. "Then we have that in common." He glanced toward the dance floor, where Celestine was currently waltzing with a young viscount, her laugh carrying across the ballroom like wind chimes. "That is your stepsister, I believe, Lady Celestine Ravensdale." Lucinda felt the familiar tension grip her shoulders. This was usually where the conversation ended, where the gentleman realized his mistake, acknowledged that he had confused the interesting wallflower with the beautiful prize, and politely extracted himself to pursue the correct quarry. "Yes," she said simply. "She's very beautiful," Julian observed. "Yes." Lucinda kept her voice neutral, preparing for the inevitable shift in his attention. "And completely uninteresting." He said it with such casual certainty that Lucinda blinked. "I can see the calculation from here. Every smile measured, every gesture designed for maximum effect. She's playing a role she's perfected, and while I'm sure many men find that enchanting, I find I prefer authenticity." Before Lucinda could process that statement, Celestine herself materialized before them, her dance finished and her attention now laser-focused on the Duke. "Your Grace," she said with a curtsy that managed to be both proper and subtly suggestive, "what a pleasure to see you've returned to London. I had heard you were travelling abroad indefinitely." "Plans change, Lady Celestine," Julian said with perfect politeness that somehow conveyed no warmth whatsoever. "Indeed they do." Celestine's smile sharpened as her gaze flicked to Lucinda. "I see you've met my stepsister. Lucinda enjoys these events so much more when she has someone to talk to. She's rather shy about joining the dancing." The implication was clear. Lucinda was too awkward, too unpopular, too inferior to attract dancing partners of her own merit. "How fortunate, then, that I prefer conversation to dancing," Julian said smoothly. "Though I confess Lady Lucinda has agreed to a waltz with me later this evening, provided the orchestra cooperates with our timing." Lucinda had agreed to no such thing, but she found herself grateful for the fiction. Celestine's expression froze for the briefest moment, before her smile reasserted itself. "How lovely," she said, the words coated in ice. "I'm sure you'll both enjoy that immensely. If you'll excuse me, I see Lady Pemberton signalling." She glided away, her posture perfect, her movements calculated to draw maximum attention. Several male heads turned to watch her progress across the ballroom. "I apologize for the presumption," Julian said once Celestine was out of earshot. But she was about to say something cruel, and I found I had no desire to witness it. "How did you know?" "The look in her eyes. I've seen it before." His expression darkened briefly. "My late brother's wife had that same expression whenever she interacted with servants she considered beneath her notice. It's the look of someone who derives pleasure from diminishing others." There was pain beneath those words, old and complicated. Lucinda filed it away as a piece of the puzzle that was Julian Montclair. "Your kindness is appreciated, even if unearned," she said. "Unearned?" He looked genuinely surprised. "Lady Lucinda, in the past 20 minutes, You've displayed more genuine insight and intelligent observation than most people manage in an entire season. If anything, I'm the one who should be grateful you've tolerated my company." The sincerity in his voice was disarming. Lucinda had grown so accustomed to mockery disguised as compliment that actual praise felt foreign, almost suspicious. "You're either an excellent flatterer or deeply unfamiliar with London society's assessment of my character," she said, "or London society is demonstrably terrible at character assessment." He held her gaze. "I've spent 3 years traveling through Europe, managing estates my brother neglected, and meeting people who were exactly what they appeared to be. Returning to London is like stepping back into a theatre where everyone knows their lines but has forgotten why they're speaking them. You're the first person I've met who seems to remember there's supposed to be meaning behind the performance." Before Lucinda could respond, the orchestra struck up a waltz. Julian extended his hand. "I believe I promised you a dance, even if I did so presumptuously. Would you grant me the honor of making my fiction into truth?" Lucinda hesitated. Dancing with the Duke of Thornbury would draw attention, exactly the kind of attention her stepmother and stepsister worked so hard to prevent her from receiving. There would be consequences, comments at breakfast, accidental exclusions from future events, small punishments designed to remind her of her place, but looking into Julian Montclair's eyes, she found she no longer cared. "I would be honored, Your Grace." His hand was warm and steady as he led her onto the floor. The moment his arm settled around her waist with proper decorum, the ballroom seemed to recede. Lucinda was a competent dancer. Her mother had insisted on lessons from an excellent master, but she had rarely had opportunity to demonstrate her skill. Most gentlemen asked her to dance out of obligation, if at all, and treated the experience as a duty to be completed quickly. Julian danced as he seemed to do everything else, with confidence and presence, but also with attention. He led her through the patterns with ease, his movements assured but never presumptuous, and throughout the dance he kept his attention focused on her face, not scanning the room for more important connections. "You're an excellent dancer," he observed. "You sound surprised." "Not surprised, pleased. There's a difference." He guided her through a turn. "Most people dance while thinking about everything except dancing. You're actually here, present in this moment. It's refreshing. Perhaps I'm simply concentrating very hard on not stepping on your feet." He laughed, genuine and warm. "Then you're doing an exceptional job of hiding your concentration. You look perfectly at ease." "Appearances can be deceiving." "Yes," he said thoughtfully. "But I'm beginning to think that in your case, Lady Lucinda, the deception runs in the opposite direction. You work very hard to appear unremarkable, when in fact you're anything but." The observation struck too close to truth for comfort. Lucinda had indeed spent years cultivating invisibility, learning to dim her own light to avoid becoming a target for Celestine's jealousy and Lady Clarice's cruelty. But having someone recognize that effort, acknowledge it, felt both validating and terrifying. "You presume much based on one conversation and one dance, Your Grace." "Julian," he corrected gently. "And you're right, I do presume, but I find my presumptions are usually accurate, particularly regarding character. My uncle says it's because I actually listen to what people say instead of what I want to hear." The music swelled toward its conclusion. As Julian returned her to the edge of the ballroom with a proper bow, Lucinda noticed the attention they had drawn. Speculation rippled through the crowd like wind across water. Lady Clarice's expression was thunderous. Celestine's smile had transformed into something brittle and dangerous. "Thank you for the dance," Julian said. "I hope it won't cause you difficulty." "It will," Lucinda said honestly. "But that's not your concern." "Isn't it?" His eyes searched hers. I dislike the idea of causing you trouble." "Then you should probably direct your attention elsewhere for the remainder of the evening," she said, even as part of her desperately hoped he wouldn't. "There are many young ladies who would welcome your interest, and unlike me, their families would celebrate rather than punish the connection." "What a depressing thought," Julian said, "being welcomed primarily for my title and fortune rather than for who I actually am. No, Lady Lucinda, I think I'll continue to direct my attention Exactly where I find it most rewarded, toward genuine conversation with interesting people. If that causes difficulties, well, I've never been particularly good at choosing the easy path." He bowed again and took his leave, moving toward his uncle who stood near the refreshment tables. Lucinda found herself alone, her heart beating faster than the dance could account for, her mind racing through the impossible implications of what had just occurred. A duke had sought her company, had defended her to Celestine, had praised her intelligence and presence, had made her feel for the first time in 6 years like something other than an obstacle to be managed or a disappointment to be tolerated. "What did you say to him?" Celestine materialized at her elbow, her voice low and furious. Up close, her beautiful face was tight with anger. "We discussed the weather and the quality of the orchestra," Lucinda said mildly. "Nothing of consequence." "Don't lie to me." Celestine's fingers dug into Lucinda's arm. "The Duke of Thornbury doesn't dance with insignificant wallflowers unless someone has manipulated the situation. What scheme are you running?" "No scheme," he asked. "I accepted, that's all." "That's never all with you." Celestine's eyes narrowed. "You think you're so clever, hiding in corners and pretending to be meek. But I see you, Lucinda. I see that calculating little mind always working. You've set your cap at the Duke, haven't you? You think you can steal him from under my nose." The accusation was so absurd that Lucinda almost laughed. "Celestine, I have no designs on the Duke or anyone else. He asked me to dance. I accepted. If that threatens you, perhaps you should examine why a single dance holds such power over your confidence. It was the wrong thing to say, even if it was true." Celestine's face flushed red, and for a moment Lucinda thought her stepsister might actually strike her. Instead, Celestine leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "You will regret this. I don't know how yet, but you will pay for attempting to embarrass me tonight. The Duke of Thornbury will never look at you again once I'm through. You are nothing, Lucinda. You have always been nothing, and I will make certain you remain nothing." She swept away in a rustle of crimson silk, leaving Lucinda standing alone with her arm aching, where Celestine's fingers had gripped too tightly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lucinda retreated to her customary observation post and watched Julian move through the ballroom with practiced ease. He danced with several young ladies, duty dances, Lucinda recognized, distributed with careful political awareness. But his expression during those dances held none of the engagement he had shown during their waltz, and his attention kept drifting back toward where she stood in the shadows. She should have been pleased, should have been flattered. Instead, she felt a knot of dread tightening in her stomach, because she knew Celestine, knew her stepmother, knew how effectively they wielded their particular brand of social destruction. And she knew that whatever Julian Montclair's intentions, his attention had just painted a target on Lucinda's back that no amount of careful invisibility could protect her from. The carriage ride home was arctic with silence. Lady Clarice stared at Lucinda with an expression that promised consequences. Celestine gazed out the window with studied indifference that somehow felt more threatening than her earlier fury. It was only when they arrived at Ravensdale House that Lady Clarice finally spoke. "My study now." Lucinda followed her stepmother into the elegant room that had once been her father's sanctuary. Lady Clarice seated herself behind the massive oak desk, another subtle usurpation, claiming the space that should by rights have belonged to Lucinda as Lord Fairlie's legitimate heir. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," Lady Clarice began, her voice cold as a blade, "but it ends tonight. You will not attend another social event this season. You will not accept callers. You will confine yourself to this house until you've learned your proper place." "On what grounds?" Lucinda kept her voice level despite the anger rising in her chest. "I've done nothing improper. You've embarrassed your sister by monopolizing the Duke of Thornbury's attention through some scheme or manipulation. Celestine has been positioned to attract his interest all season. Your interference will not be tolerated. I had one conversation and one dance, hardly a monopoly. Don't be clever with me, girl." Lady Clarice's palm struck the desk. "You know exactly what you've done. The Duke showed you attention that rightfully belongs to Celestine. You've always been jealous of her beauty, her charm, her superiority in every way. Tonight you allowed that jealousy to drive you to inappropriate behavior, and there will be consequences. The injustice of it crashed over Lucinda like a wave. 6 years of swallowing similar accusations, 6 years of accepting blame for sins she never committed, 6 years of watching Celestine receive credit for Lucinda's ideas, her work, her careful management of household affairs that kept Ravensdale House running smoothly. "I reject your accusation entirely," Lucinda said quietly. "The Duke approached me of his own volition. I was polite, but not forward. I danced one waltz. If that threatens Celestine's position, perhaps her position was never as secure as you believed. She saw the blow coming, but had nowhere to retreat. Lady Clarice's hand connected with her cheek hard enough to snap her head to the side, hard enough to bring tears to her eyes that she absolutely refused to shed. You will learn respect," Lady Clarice hissed. "You will learn your place, and you will learn that defying me carries a price. You are confined to this house until I decide otherwise. Margaret can bring your meals to your room. You will not participate in any social activities. And if the Duke of Thornbury calls, which I very much doubt he will, you will not be at home to receive him. Is that understood?" Lucinda touched her stinging cheek and met her stepmother's eyes with a level gaze that gave away nothing of the fury burning beneath her skin. "Perfectly understood. Good. Now get out of my sight." Lucinda climbed the stairs to her room with measured steps, refusing to run, refusing to show weakness. Once inside with the door closed, she finally allowed herself to lean against the wall and breathe through the shaking that threatened to overtake her. She should have expected this, should have known better than to accept Julian's attention, no matter how genuinely offered, should have remembered that in this house, any happiness she claimed for herself would be systematically dismantled. But even as she thought it, another voice whispered in her mind, her mother's voice remembered from childhood. "The right person will see you, and when that happens, you must have the courage to be seen." Perhaps Julian Montclair had seen her. Perhaps his interest had been real. Perhaps for one evening she had been something more than the forgotten daughter, the second choice, the obstacle to be managed. And perhaps that single evening would have to be enough. She moved to her writing desk and pulled out her journal, the one place where she could be completely honest. The leather was worn from years of use, the pages filled with observations, thoughts, and the private rebellion of a mind that refused to be diminished no matter how hard they tried. Tonight she wrote about dark eyes that catalogued details, about a voice that offered choice instead of obligation, about a dance that felt like being seen for the first time in years, and about the terrible, impossible hope that maybe, just maybe, something had shifted in the careful architecture of her erasure. Outside her window, the rain continued to fall on London, washing the streets clean and carrying away all evidence of the evening's events. But inside Ravensdale House, in a room at the top of the stairs where a young woman sat writing by candlelight, something had changed. Lucinda Fairley had been seen. And having tasted that recognition, she found she was no longer willing to accept invisibility as her permanent condition. Whatever came next, whatever punishment, whatever scheme, whatever cruelty her stepmother and stepsister devised, she would face it as herself, completely, authentically, without apology, the woman her mother had raised, the woman her father had forgotten, the woman Julian Montclair had recognized in a single conversation, the woman she had always been, waiting in the shadows for her moment to step into light. That moment, she decided as she closed her journal and extinguished her candle, had finally arrived. The morning brought an unexpected visitor. Lucinda woke to the sound of raised voices drifting up from the entrance hall, her stepmother's clipped tones colliding with a masculine voice that carried the unmistakable authority of someone unaccustomed to being denied. She moved to her door and opened it just enough to hear the conversation below. "I'm afraid Lady Lucinda is indisposed this morning," Lady Clarice was saying with false regret. "A headache, you understand. She's not receiving callers." "How unfortunate," Julian's voice. Lucinda's breath caught. "Please convey my wishes for her swift recovery. I'll call again tomorrow." That won't be necessary, Your Grace. I'm certain her condition will persist for some time. There was a pause, and Lucinda could almost feel the shift in temperature as Julian processed the deliberate obstruction. Lady Montjoy, let me be direct. I have a rather keen sense for when I'm being manoeuvred, and I find I have little patience for it. Lady Lucinda was in excellent health last night. If she genuinely requires rest, I'll of course respect that. But if there are other circumstances preventing our meeting, I'd prefer we address them honestly. I don't appreciate your tone, Your Grace, and I don't appreciate being lied to. Steel beneath silk. I'll call again tomorrow. Good day. The front door closed with deliberate precision. Lucinda heard her stepmother's sharp intake of breath, followed by Celestine's voice from the drawing room. Let him come. Lucinda won't receive him, and he'll eventually tire of the pursuit. Men always do when the quarry proves difficult. You underestimate his interest, Lady Clarice said darkly. We need to act more decisively. Lucinda eased her door closed before they could continue. Her mind raced through possibilities, calculating the limited options available to a woman with no fortune of her own, no independent means, and a stepmother who controlled her access to the outside world through her role as guardian. She was 23, legally of age, but practically constrained by social convention and financial reality. Her father's will had left the bulk of his estate to her, but she couldn't access it until marriage or her 25th birthday, and that inheritance was currently managed by executors who deferred to Lady Clarice on all matters concerning Lucinda's welfare. A gilded cage with her stepmother holding all the keys. The day crawled past with excruciating slowness. Margaret, the housemaid who had served the Fairley family since before Lucinda's birth, brought meals and news from below stairs with careful discretion. His Grace called again this afternoon, miss, Margaret whispered, as she set down the dinner tray. Her ladyship told him you were still indisposed. He asked specifically about the nature of your illness, and when Lady Montjoy couldn't provide details, he suggested he'd send his personal physician to attend you. Lucinda felt a smile tug at her lips despite her circumstances. What did she say to that? That such measures were unnecessary for a simple headache, and that your condition was improving. He didn't look convinced, miss. Looked rather determined, if I may say so. Thank you, Margaret, for everything. The older woman's expression softened. Your mother would be proud of you, Lady Lucinda, standing up for yourself finally. It's about time. After Margaret left, Lucinda returned to her window and watched the street below. Carriages passed in steady procession. Ladies strolled with their maids in attendance. Life continued in its measured rhythm, completely indifferent to one woman's confinement. She was considering her next move when she noticed a figure standing across the street, partially obscured by an elm tree. Even from this distance, she recognized Julian's profile. He stood there for nearly an hour, simply watching the house before finally walking away into the gathering dusk. Something warm and fierce bloomed in Lucinda's chest. He hadn't given up, hadn't accepted her stepmother's dismissals at face value, had in fact stationed himself where Lady Clarice couldn't control the interaction, just to ensure Lucinda was actually well. Perhaps her mother had been right about recognition leading to courage. Perhaps being seen truly was worth the risk of exposure. That night Lucinda wrote a letter. She wrote carefully, aware that any correspondence leaving Ravensdale House would likely be intercepted. But she also knew the house's rhythms, knew that Margaret could be trusted, and knew that determination combined with intelligence often found a way around obstacles that seemed insurmountable. The letter was brief, honest, and strategically vague. Your Grace, thank you for your concern regarding my health. I assure you I am quite well, though circumstances have indeed kept me confined. I regret any inconvenience my situation may cause, and I appreciate your understanding. The conversation we shared at the Ashworth Ball was among the most genuine interactions I've experienced in London society. Whatever comes of it, please know that your recognition meant more than you might realize. With sincere regards, Lady Lucinda Fairley. She sealed it carefully and waited until well past midnight before slipping down to the kitchen, where Margaret was finishing her final duties. Can this reach the Duke of Thornbury without my stepmother's knowledge? Lucinda asked quietly. Margaret took the letter and tucked it into her apron. My brother works in the Thornbury stables, miss. I'll have it delivered directly to His Grace's hands, no one else's. You have my word. Thank you. And, Margaret, please be careful. If Lady Montjoy discovers you've helped me— I've been with this family since your mother was mistress here, Margaret said firmly. Her ladyship may give orders, but she's not my loyalty. That belongs to the true Lady Fairlie's daughter, not some social climbing widow who married her way into a title. The fierce declaration brought tears to Lucinda's eyes. She squeezed Margaret's hand gratefully before returning to her room, hope flickering in her chest like a candle flame in darkness. 2 days later, everything changed. Lucinda was in her room when she heard the commotion below. Not angry voices this time, but Lady Clarice's honeyed tones of false welcome. Curious, she moved to her door and opened it a crack. "Your Grace, this is an unexpected honor," her stepmother was saying. "Please, come into the drawing room. I'll have tea brought immediately." "That won't be necessary, Lady Montjoy. I've come on specific business that requires brevity." "Of course. How may I assist you?" "By producing Lady Lucinda Fairlie." Silence fell, like dropped crystal. "I'm afraid that's not possible at the moment," Lady Clarice recovered smoothly. "As I've mentioned, she's been quite unwell. The physician has recommended complete rest and—" "Which physician?" Julian's voice cut through the excuse like a blade. "Because I took the liberty of contacting every reputable physician in London, and none of them have been called to Ravensdale House in the past week. So either Lady Lucinda is being attended by someone spectacularly unqualified, or she's not actually ill at all." Lucinda's heart hammered against her ribs. He had investigated, had refused to accept the polite fiction, had pushed back against the social machinery designed to keep them separated. "For your Grace, I don't appreciate these insinuations, and I don't appreciate being deliberately obstructed." Steel again, unmistakable. "Lady Montjoy, let me be exceptionally clear. I received a letter from Lady Lucinda 3 days ago, and the phrasing suggested circumstances beyond simple illness. If she's being confined against her will, that's a serious matter. If she genuinely wishes no further contact with me, I'll of course respect that decision, but I require that information directly from her, not filtered through intermediaries with their own agendas." "How dare you suggest—" "I suggest nothing. I state facts." A pause. "You have 2 options. Produce Lady Lucinda now so I can verify her welfare and hear her preferences directly, or I'll return with the magistrate and we'll explore the matter more formally. Legal guardianship of an adult woman doesn't extend to imprisonment, and there are questions to be asked about the administration of Lord Fairlie's estate that I suspect wouldn't survive close examination." The threat hung in the air like drawn steel. Lucinda held her breath, torn between elation at Julian's defense and terror at the consequences of his intervention. Her stepmother's voice, when she spoke again, was pure venom wrapped in silk. "I see the Duke of Thornbury has been misled by a manipulative young woman into believing himself a knight rescuing a damsel. How unfortunate." "Very well, Your Grace. I'll summon Lady Lucinda, but I warn you, she's a schemer who has used her appearance of meekness to avoid responsibility and create drama. Whatever she's told you is likely exaggerated or outright false." "Then she can tell me that herself." Footsteps on the stairs. Lucinda barely had time to step back from her door before Lady Clarice appeared, her expression promising retribution. "The Duke wishes to see you," she said coldly. "I suggest you disabuse him of whatever fantasies you've created. Make it clear that his attentions are unwelcome, or I promise you'll regret it." Lucinda smoothed her dress, the same dove-grey gown from the ball, as she'd been forbidden access to anything more elaborate, and lifted her chin. "I'll tell him the truth. All of it." Her stepmother's eyes narrowed dangerously, but with Julian waiting below, there was nothing she could do. Lucinda descended the stairs with her heart racing, aware that everything she'd carefully constructed over the past 6 years was about to either collapse entirely or transform into something completely new. Julian stood in the entrance hall, and the expression on his face when he saw her made something in Lucinda's chest break open. Relief, concern, and an intensity of focus that suggested he'd been genuinely worried. "Lady Lucinda." He bowed with perfect formality, but his eyes searched hers with urgent questions. "I apologize for the disruption, but I needed to assure myself of your welfare. Are you well?" "I am." She was acutely aware of Lady Clarice hovering nearby, of Celestine watching from the drawing-room doorway with poisonous attention. "Thank you for your concern. You received my letter." At her nod, he continued, "Then you understand that I've come to hear directly from you whether my attentions are welcome or burdensome. Lady Montjoy has suggested the latter, but I confess your correspondence implied otherwise. It was the most delicate way possible of asking, are you being coerced?" Lucinda made her choice, the careful choice, the brave choice, the honest choice. "Your attentions are neither burdensome nor unwelcome, Your Grace. They are, in fact, the most genuine interest anyone has shown in my company for quite some time. However, my current circumstances make it complicated to pursue any social connection." "Complicated how?" "I've been confined to the house following our interaction at the Ashworth ball." She said it clearly, loudly enough for everyone present to hear. Lady Clarice made a strangled sound of outrage. "That's a lie. She's been ill and she's exaggerating simple precautions into—" "I've been confined," Lucinda repeated, meeting Julian's eyes. "As punishment for attracting your attention. My stepmother believes your interest should be directed toward my stepsister instead, and she has taken measures to ensure that outcome by preventing me from attending any social events or receiving visitors." "Lucinda!" Lady Clarice's voice cracked like a whip. "How dare you spread such vicious falsehoods? Your Grace, I assure you, this is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I warned you about. She's trying to create sympathy and drama to— "To what?" Julian's voice could have frozen fire. "To secure my interest? Lady Montjoy, I'm a duke. If Lady Lucinda were inclined toward manipulation, she could have easily claimed compromise, created scandal, forced my hand through any number of socially acceptable maneuvers. Instead, she wrote me a letter that was remarkably careful to avoid imposing any obligation on me whatsoever. That doesn't suggest manipulation. It suggests integrity." He turned back to Lucinda, and something in his expression shifted, softened and hardened simultaneously, if such a thing were possible. "Lady Lucinda, I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer with complete honesty. Are you in danger in this house?" "Not physically," she said carefully, "but I am not free." "That's enough." He turned to Lady Clarice with the kind of cold fury that made aristocratic power visible in the air. "Lady Montjoy, you are no longer Lady Lucinda's guardian. As of this moment, I'm assuming responsibility for her welfare and her person. You have no authority. I have every authority. I'm a Duke of the realm, a member of the House of Lords, and a close friend of several magistrates who would be very interested to learn about your treatment of Lord Fairlie's legitimate daughter. Unless you'd prefer to contest this matter legally and have your administration of her inheritance examined in the process, I suggest you accept my protection of Lady Lucinda gracefully." "This is kidnapping." "This is rescue." Julian's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it was unmistakable. "Lady Lucinda is an adult woman of legal age who has stated clearly that she's being confined against her will. I'm offering her an alternative. Lady Lucinda, would you like to leave this house?" She should have been terrified, should have considered the scandal, the implications, the social consequences of accepting a duke's protection without proper chaperonage, should have calculated all the ways this could destroy her reputation beyond any hope of repair. Instead, she thought about her mother's voice. "You must have the courage to be seen." "Yes," she said firmly, "I would." "Then gather what you need. I'll wait here while you pack." Lucinda moved toward the stairs, but Celestine blocked her path, beautiful face twisted with ugly fury. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think the Duke will actually marry you? He's rescuing you out of pity, Lucinda. Once he realizes what you actually are, a boring, bookish nobody with no beauty or charm, he'll discard you like everyone else has. You'll be ruined, unmarriageable, and you'll have nothing. At least here you had a place, even if it was at the bottom." Lucinda met her stepsister's eyes and spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "I'd rather be ruined and free than preserved and caged. And Celestine, I've never been at the bottom. I've been hiding at the bottom by choice, watching you perform your pretty puppet show while I learned everything about how this world actually works. The difference between us is that I don't need men to admire me to know my worth. You do, and that makes you weaker than you've ever realized." She brushed past her stepsister and climbed the stairs to her room. Her hands shook as she pulled out the small trunk that had traveled with her from her mother's house all those years ago. She packed quickly, efficiently. Clothes, books, her journal, the few personal items that held meaning. The emerald necklace her mother had left her, the letters her father had written when she was young, before grief had hollowed him out. Margaret appeared in the doorway, tears streaming down her weathered face. "Go, miss," she whispered. "Go and don't look back. Your mother would want you free." "Thank you, Margaret, for everything, all these years." "It was my honor, Lady Lucinda. You're the image of Lady Margaret, and you have her spirit. Show London what that means." Lucinda descended the stairs with her trunk, and Julian immediately took it from her hands, despite her protest. He handed it to a footman waiting by the door. His footman, she realized, not one of the Ravensdale house servants. "My carriage is outside," he said formally. "My aunt, the Dowager Duchess of Thornbury, is waiting to receive you at Thornbury House. She'll serve as your chaperone and protector. You'll be completely respectable, completely safe and completely free to make your own choices about your future." He was offering her everything: escape, protection, respectability, and, most importantly, choice. No obligations, no expectations, just freedom to decide her own path. "Your Grace," Lady Clarice said, her voice shaking with impotent rage, "this is unconscionable. When London hears how you've stolen Lord Fairlie's daughter from her rightful home, London will hear that I've protected Lady Lucinda from an abusive guardian who confined her against her will," Julian said coldly. "And should you attempt to spread any other version of events, I'll ensure that every detail of your treatment of her becomes public knowledge. How you've systematically isolated her, denied her social opportunities, withheld her correspondence, and attempted to erase her from London society in favor of your own daughter. Is that a conversation you'd like to have publicly, Lady Montjoy?" The silence was absolute. Finally, Lady Clarice stepped back, her expression promising future vengeance, but lacking any immediate recourse. Julian offered Lucinda his arm. "Shall we?" They walked out together into the late afternoon sunshine, and Lucinda felt like she was breathing properly for the first time in 6 years. The carriage waited at the curb, the Thornbury crest gleaming on its door. Inside, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair sat waiting. "Aunt Catherine, may I present Lady Lucinda Fairlie, Lady Lucinda, my aunt, Catherine Montclair, Dowager Duchess of Thornbury." "My dear girl," the Dowager said warmly, "Julian has told me something of your circumstances. You're most welcome at Thornbury House for as long as you require sanctuary, and anyone who suggests impropriety in your residence there will answer to me personally." Lucinda felt tears threatening and forced them back through sheer will. "Thank you, Your Grace. I don't know how to adequately express—" "No thanks necessary. My nephew has excellent instincts about people, and he says you're worth defending. That's sufficient for me." Her eyes twinkled. "Also, between you and me, I've been hoping someone would give Clarice Montjoy her comeuppance for years. That woman is a social climbing harridan who has terrorized half of London through sheer force of spite." Despite everything, Lucinda laughed. The sound felt foreign, unexpected, wonderful. The carriage pulled away from Ravensdale House, and Lucinda watched through the window as the building that had been her prison for 6 years receded into the distance. She should have felt triumph, relief, victory. Instead, she felt something far more complex: the terrifying freedom of possibility, the weight of choice, the responsibility of being seen for who she actually was, rather than hiding behind carefully constructed invisibility. Julian sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. "I should clarify something," he said quietly. "My intervention today wasn't motivated by romantic interest, though I won't deny that I find you remarkably interesting. It was motivated by the recognition that you were in an untenable situation and needed help. I want you to understand that there are no expectations attached to my assistance. You're free to stay at Thornbury House, restore your reputation, Access your inheritance once the proper legalities are arranged, and then choose whatever path you wish, including a path that doesn't involve me at all." His honesty was both reassuring and strangely disappointing, but Lucinda recognized it for what it was: respect. The same respect he'd shown from their first conversation, treating her as a full human being capable of making her own decisions rather than a prize to be won or a problem to be solved. "That's remarkably generous, Your Grace." "Julian," he corrected gently, "and it's not generosity. It's basic decency, which should be the minimum standard, but unfortunately rarely is. You deserve freedom to choose your own life, Lady Lucinda. Whatever happens next is entirely up to you." The carriage rolled through London toward Thornbury House, toward freedom, toward possibility, and Lucinda Fairley, who had spent 6 years learning to be invisible, found herself contemplating what it might mean to finally, fully, courageously be seen. Whatever came next, it would be her choice, her decision, her life. And that, she realized, was everything. Thornbury House was nothing like Ravensdale House. Where her stepmother's home had been all careful elegance designed for social display, the Thornbury residence radiated warmth and lived in comfort. Yes, the furnishings were expensive and the art was museum quality, but books lay open on tables, fresh flowers filled every room, and the staff smiled when they thought no one was watching. The Dowager Duchess installed Lucinda in a suite overlooking the gardens, with the efficiency of someone well practiced at providing sanctuary. "You'll want time to adjust," Catherine said, settling into a chair while Lucinda explored her new quarters. "Julian mentioned you're a reader. The library is yours to use freely. 3rd door on the left, down the main corridor. We dress for dinner but otherwise keep informal hours. And please, dear girl, understand that you're a guest here, not a prisoner or a charity case. Come and go as you please, though I'd suggest having a maid accompany you initially until London's gossips tire of speculating about your sudden relocation." "They'll say terrible things," Lucinda said quietly. "About me, about the Duke, about impropriety." "Undoubtedly." Catherine's eyes sparkled. "London loves nothing more than a scandal. But here's what I've learned in 73 years. Gossip only has the power you give it. Let them speculate. Let them whisper. Within a month, they'll have moved on to some other drama and you'll still be here, free and choosing your own path." That evening, Lucinda joined Julian and his aunt for dinner. The meal was surprisingly relaxed, conversation flowing naturally through topics ranging from politics to literature to Julian's travels through Italy. He spoke about art and architecture with genuine passion, describing the way light fell through cathedral windows and the mathematical precision of Renaissance paintings. "You've clearly spent considerable time studying beauty," Lucinda observed. "I spent considerable time learning to see it," Julian corrected. "There's a difference. Most people glance at beautiful things and move on. But if you actually stop and observe, really observe, you discover layers of meaning and intention that casual viewing misses entirely." "Like people," Lucinda said quietly. "Exactly like people." His eyes met hers across the table. Most of London never bothers to actually see beyond the surface performance. They're satisfied with whatever role someone plays and never question whether there's depth beneath. It's remarkably lazy, actually. "And remarkably convenient," Lucinda added. "If you never look closely, you never have to acknowledge complexity. Everyone stays in their assigned role and the social machinery continues running smoothly. Until someone disrupts the machinery by actually being human rather than playing a part," Julian finished, "which is precisely what you did at the Ashworth ball. I simply answered your questions honestly." "Which is itself a radical act in a society built on performance," Catherine interjected. "Julian is right to find it remarkable. Most young ladies would have simpered and flattered. You engaged in genuine conversation. It's no wonder you caught his attention." Over the following days, a pattern emerged. Lucinda spent mornings in the Thornbury Library, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves and windows that flooded the space with natural light. She read voraciously. Philosophy, history, novels she'd been denied access to at Ravensdale House. In the afternoons, she walked the gardens with Catherine. learning the older woman's considerable wisdom about navigating London society. The key, Catherine explained during one such walk, is understanding that reputation is a game, and like all games, it has rules. The trick is knowing which rules actually matter and which are simply theatrical convention. And how does one distinguish between them? By observing consequences. Rules that carry real power result in genuine social exclusion or opportunity. Rules that are merely convention result in momentary gossip that fades quickly. Your current situation, for instance, yes, there will be talk about your residence here, but I'm a dowager duchess providing chaperonage. Julian has behaved with complete propriety, and you're an unmarried woman of good family who was demonstrably mistreated by her guardian. The gossip will be vicious initially, but ultimately toothless, because the underlying facts support your respectability. And if the facts were different, then we'd adjust the strategy accordingly, but they're not, so we won't. Catherine smiled. You're far more strategic than you've been allowed to demonstrate, my dear. I can see you calculating possibilities, considering angles, planning several moves ahead. It's quite impressive. My stepmother called it scheming. Your stepmother is an idiot who mistakes her daughter's superficial performance for actual intelligence. You, Lucinda, have what truly matters, the ability to think clearly, observe accurately, and adapt appropriately. Those skills will serve you far better than Celestine's beauty ever will. Julian himself maintained a careful distance that Lucinda found both respectful and oddly frustrating. He joined them for meals, engaged in brilliant conversation, and treated her with unfailing courtesy. But he made no overtures beyond friendship, created no situations that might be construed as romantic pursuit, and never once suggested that his assistance came with expectations of reciprocation. It was exactly what he'd promised, freedom to choose without obligation. So why did part of her wish he'd be slightly less honourable? The question nagged at her as she prepared for her first public appearance since leaving Ravensdale House. Catherine had arranged attendance at a private musical hosted by Lady Pemberton, a carefully chosen venue that would reintroduce Lucinda to society under unimpeachably respectable circumstances. Small gathering, excellent music, and Lady Pemberton owes me several favours, Catherine explained. She'll ensure you're welcomed warmly, which will signal to others that you're under Thornbury protection. After that, invitations will follow naturally. Or condemnation will. Possibly both. We'll handle whatever comes. The musicale was indeed intimate, perhaps 40 guests arranged in Lady Pemberton's drawing room. Lucinda entered on Catherine's arm, acutely aware of the attention that swiveled toward them like compass needles finding north. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes assessed, catalogued, judged. Lady Pemberton swept forward with determined hospitality. Dowager Duchess, what a delight. And Lady Lucinda, I'm so pleased you could join us. I understand you've been unwell recently. The question was loaded with subtext, offering Lucinda an easy fiction if she chose to take it. I'm quite recovered, thank you, Lucinda said clearly. The change of residence has done me considerable good. I'm sure it has. Lady Pemberton's eyes gleamed with approval. Do come meet the soprano. She's from Milan and quite extraordinary. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. Yes, there were whispers. Yes, there were speculative glances. But Catherine's presence provided an impenetrable shield of respectability, and Lady Pemberton's obvious approval signalled that Lucinda was to be welcomed rather than shunned. Julian arrived late, apologising for parliamentary duties that had delayed him. When he entered the room, Lucinda watched half the unmarried women present adjust their posture and brighten their smiles. But his attention swept past them and landed on her with obvious pleasure. Lady Lucinda, he said, crossing the room to her side. I'm delighted to see you here. How are you finding the music? Extraordinary. The soprano's technique is flawless. But, he caught the hesitation in her voice, but technique without emotion is merely performance. She sings perfectly, but I'm not certain she feels what she's singing. Julian's smile widened. That's precisely what I was thinking. The notes are all correct, but something essential is missing. Most people here won't notice, They'll applaud the technical brilliance and consider themselves cultured, but you hear the absence of authentic feeling. Perhaps I'm being unfair. Or perhaps you're being honest, which is far more valuable. He lowered his voice. You're managing the attention well. I've been watching the room, and most of the reaction is curiosity rather than condemnation, thanks to your aunt's masterful positioning. And your own composure. Aunt Catherine provided the shield, but you're the one walking forward with it. That takes courage. Before Lucinda could respond, Celestine's voice cut across the room like shattered crystal. Why, if it isn't my dear stepsister? What a surprise to see you here, Lucinda. I thought you were still recovering from your headache. Celestine materialized beside them, resplendent in emerald silk that matched her calculating eyes. Lady Clarisse hovered behind her daughter like a storm cloud waiting to break. Lady Celestine, Julian said with cool politeness. Lady Montjoy, good evening. Your Grace. Celestine's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. I must thank you for your concern regarding my stepsister's welfare, though I confess, removing her from her home seems rather dramatic for what was merely a minor ailment. Her confinement seemed rather dramatic for what was merely a dance, Julian replied smoothly. But then perspectives differ depending on whose freedom is being restricted. The hit landed. Celestine's smile froze, and Lady Clarisse's face flushed an unbecoming shade of red. I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding, Lady Clarisse said tightly. Lucinda has always been prone to exaggeration and— Lucinda has been prone to honesty, Catherine interrupted, appearing at Lucinda's other side like a battle-ready general, which I understand can be uncomfortable for those who prefer convenient fictions. Lady Montjoy, how lovely to see you've recovered from your obvious disappointment at losing control over your stepdaughter's life. I do hope you're not finding the adjustment too difficult. It was a perfectly worded declaration of war, delivered with such elegant courtesy that half the room probably missed its lethal edge. But Lady Clarisse understood, and her expression promised future retaliation. Come, Celestine, she said coldly. I believe we're wanted elsewhere. They swept away in a rustle of expensive fabric and wounded pride. The moment they were out of earshot, Catherine turned to Lucinda with satisfaction. That went well. Did it? Lucinda's heart was still racing. She looked murderous. Yes, but she retreated. That's what matters. In social warfare, the first engagement sets the tone for everything that follows. We've established that you're under Thornbury protection, that challenges to your respectability will be met with overwhelming force, and that Clarisse Montjoy has lost the power she once wielded over you. Everything else is merely details. Over the following weeks, London adjusted to Lucinda's new status, with the grudging acceptance of a society that ultimately cared more about power than propriety. The Thornbury name carried weight that even the most determined gossips couldn't overcome, and Catherine's strategic positioning ensured that Lucinda received invitations to the right events, introductions to the right people, and recognition as a woman of quality rather than a social refugee. But it was Julian's consistent presence that truly shifted the narrative. He didn't court her overtly. That would have suggested obligation and pressure. Instead, he simply ensured he was wherever she was, engaging her in conversation, dancing with her at balls, escorting her to exhibitions and lectures. His attention was unmistakable but never presumptuous, public but never possessive. You're creating a story, Lucinda observed one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park with Catherine trailing at a discreet distance. Letting London see us together repeatedly until they accept it as natural rather than scandalous. Is that objectionable? Julian asked carefully. No, it's brilliant, but I'm curious about your motivations. You said you had no expectations, yet you're clearly investing considerable time and effort into— What exactly? Rehabilitation of my reputation? Or something else? He was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunlight filter through the trees. Honestly? Both. Initially, my motivation was simple justice. You were in an untenable situation and deserved help. But the more time I spend in your company, the more I find myself hoping that once your reputation is secure and your choices are truly free, You might choose to spend time with me not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you actually want to." The honesty was characteristic and disarming. Lucinda stopped walking and turned to face him directly. "And if I already want to? If gratitude isn't the primary emotion I'm experiencing? Then I would be pleased." His eyes searched hers, but also cautious. "You've been manipulated and controlled for years, Lucinda. I don't want to become another person shaping your choices, even with good intentions. You need time to discover who you are outside of anyone else's expectations, mine included." "What if I already know who I am? What if the past 6 years taught me exactly that, showed me my own strength, my own resilience, my own mind, and now I'm ready to choose based on that knowledge rather than needing more time to discover it?" Julian's expression shifted, hope, caution, and something deeper all mixing together. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that you saw me when everyone else looked away, that you recognized intelligence when others only saw an obstacle, that you offered freedom without obligation, which is perhaps the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And I'm saying that having experienced genuine recognition, I find I have no interest in settling for anything less." "Lucinda, I'm also saying," she continued, "that if you're waiting for me to be completely independent before pursuing courtship out of some noble desire not to influence my choices, you're going to be waiting a very long time. Because I am independent. Right now. This moment. And I'm choosing to tell you that your company isn't something I tolerate out of gratitude. It's something I actively seek because you make me feel fully alive for the first time in years." The declaration hung between them like a held breath. Julian's hand found hers, the touch sending electricity through her entire body. "You're certain?" "Completely. Then I should probably tell you that I've been half in love with you since the Ashworth ball, and that every conversation since has only made it worse, and that I've been exercising superhuman restraint to avoid pressuring you because I wanted you to be free to choose, but that if you're actually choosing me, then I'm going to stop pretending this is anything other than what it actually is." "Which is?" "Courtship. Real, genuine, traditional courtship with marriage as the ultimate goal, assuming we continue to suit each other, as well as I believe we will." He squeezed her hand gently. "I'm going to court you properly, Lucinda Fairley, in full view of London, with complete transparency about my intentions, and if anyone suggests impropriety, I'll simply note that I'm pursuing the woman I intend to marry with appropriate chaperonage and complete respect for her autonomy. Is that acceptable?" Lucinda felt joy bubble up in her chest, effervescent and impossible to contain. "More than acceptable. It's perfect." "Good. Then we should probably tell Aunt Catherine, who is pretending very hard not to eavesdrop from behind that oak tree." Catherine emerged with absolutely no shame whatsoever. "It's about time. I was beginning to think you'd both spend the entire season circling each other like overly cautious diplomats." "Lucinda, dear, do you accept my nephew's suit?" "Provisionally," Lucinda said, unable to suppress her smile. "Pending continued evidence that he can actually keep up with me intellectually." "Challenge accepted," Julian said immediately. "I should warn you, I'm extremely competitive about intellectual discourse." "Good. So am I." The formal courtship that followed was everything Lucinda had never known she wanted. Julian escorted her to lectures on natural philosophy, where they debated theories for hours afterward. They attended gallery exhibitions and argued about artistic merit. They read the same books and filled the margins with notes for each other. They talked about everything with complete honesty, without performance or pretense. And London watched with fascination as the Duke of Thornbury courted Lady Lucinda Fairley with obvious devotion. "She's not even pretty," Lucinda overheard one young lady whisper at a ball. "No," her companion agreed, "but watch how he looks at her, like she's the only person in the room who matters. That's better than pretty." The observation warmed something deep in Lucinda's chest. She was being chosen, truly chosen, not for performance or beauty or social advantage, but for exactly who she was. The proposal came 3 months later, during a morning walk through the Thornbury Gardens. Julian led her to a small pavilion overlooking a pond, where early spring flowers were just beginning to bloom. "I've been thinking about first choices," he said without preamble. "About what it means to choose someone not because they're available or convenient or socially advantageous, but because they're exactly right, because their mind challenges yours, their presence makes you better, and their absence makes the world feel less vibrant." "That's a very specific set of criteria," Lucinda said, her heart beginning to race. "It is, and you meet every single one." He took both her hands in his. "Lucinda Fairley, you were never anyone's second choice. You were always the first choice, the only choice that mattered. For anyone with the intelligence to actually see you, I saw you from the first moment at the Ashworth Ball, and I've been falling more deeply in love with you every day since. Will you marry me? Not because I rescued you or because you owe me gratitude, but because you choose us. Choose the life we could build together." Tears spilled down Lucinda's cheeks, but they were tears of joy so pure it felt like sunlight. "Yes," she said. "Yes, because you see me. Yes, because you challenged me to stop hiding. Yes, because you gave me freedom, and then waited while I chose to give my heart to you freely. Yes to all of it, Julian. Yes." He kissed her then, proper courtship completely forgotten in favor of genuine emotion. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathless and laughing, Lucinda felt the final chains of her past fall away completely. She was free. She was chosen. She was loved. She was first. The wedding took place 6 weeks later at St. George's, Hanover Square. All of London attended, drawn by curiosity and scandal, and the sheer dramatic arc of the story that had unfolded across the season. Lady Clarice and Celestine received invitations. Julian insisted, saying Lucinda's triumph should be witnessed by those who had tried to prevent it. They attended with barely concealed rage, sitting through the ceremony where Lady Lucinda Fairley became the Duchess of Thornbury, in front of everyone who had once dismissed her as insignificant. During the reception at Thornbury House, Catherine pulled Lucinda aside with tears in her eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," she said quietly. "Not just of the match, though Julian is indeed worthy, but of who you've become, the woman who refused to stay invisible, who had the courage to be seen, and who chose her own path rather than accepting the one others tried to force upon her. I couldn't have done it without your help, without Julian's recognition. No, dear, we provided opportunity and support, but you did the actual work of stepping into light and staying there even when it was terrifying. That courage was always yours." As evening fell and guests departed, Lucinda found herself on the terrace overlooking the gardens, her new husband beside her and her new life stretching out before her like an open book waiting to be written. "Are you happy?" Julian asked softly. Deliriously. She leaned into his embrace. "Though I confess, part of me still can't quite believe this is real, that I'm actually here, married to you, no longer trapped in that house with people who wanted me erased. It's real. And you were never invisible, Lucinda. You were just surrounded by people determined not to see you. But London sees you now, sees the Duchess of Thornbury, who's brilliant and brave, and refusing to play by the rules that kept her confined. I'm going to use this position, you know, she said thoughtfully. This platform, this power. I'm going to help other young women who are trapped like I was. Create opportunities for them to be educated, to be independent, to choose their own paths rather than accepted, rather than confirmed, comfortable assumptions. You're making enemies, Julian observed one evening, reading her latest published essay. Good. The right kind of enemies mean I'm doing something worthwhile. I agree completely, though I reserve the right to be protective when those enemies become too aggressive. Fair enough. As long as you remember that I'm not fragile. Oh, I'm well aware. You're terrifying, actually. I'm merely your devoted accomplice in terrifying others. A year after their marriage, Lucinda received an unexpected visitor. Margaret, her former maid from Ravensdale House, requested an audience with urgent news. Lady Celestine is to be married, Margaret reported, to Lord Pemberton's eldest son. It's considered quite the advantageous match. I'm pleased for her, Lucinda said honestly. And she was. Not because Celestine deserved happiness particularly, but because everyone deserved the chance to move forward. There's more, Your Grace. Lady Montjoy has been reduced to living on a modest allowance in Bath. Seems that once you were no longer under her control, the executors of Lord Fairlie's estate investigated her management of your inheritance, found considerable irregularities. She's not destitute, but her social position has been significantly reduced. Lucinda absorbed this information without satisfaction or vindictive pleasure. Lady Clarisse's downfall was simply cause and effect, consequences for actions taken freely. Thank you for informing me, Margaret. Is there anything you need? You're always welcome here if you require employment. I'm well situated, Your Grace, but I appreciate the offer. I just thought you should know that justice, even delayed, does sometimes arrive. After Margaret left, Lucinda stood at her window overlooking the gardens where she and Julian had walked during their courtship. So much had changed. So much had transformed from impossible to inevitable. She thought about the girl she'd been at the Ashworth ball, trapped, diminished, trained to accept invisibility as her permanent condition. And she thought about the woman she'd become, duchess, writer, reformer, wife, the woman who had been seen, chosen and empowered to create change. Deep thoughts. Julian entered and wrapped his arms around her from behind, reflecting on transformation, on how one moment of genuine recognition can redirect an entire life. You would have found your way eventually, he said with certainty, with or without my attention at that ball. You're too strong, too intelligent, too determined to have stayed invisible forever. Perhaps, but your recognition accelerated the process, gave me permission to stop hiding. Then I'm grateful I was paying attention, that I looked past the performance to see who was actually there. He turned her to face him. You know what the greatest gift has been? Not just finding you, but discovering that the woman I fell in love with was even more remarkable than I initially realized. Every day you surprise me, challenge me, make me better. Good. That was the plan. He laughed, and the sound filled Lucinda with joy so complete it felt like coming home. 5 years later, Lucinda stood in the drawing room of Thornbury House addressing a gathering of young women who had received scholarships from her educational foundation. She looked at their eager faces, some confident, some uncertain, all hungry for opportunity, and saw herself reflected in their determination. You've been told that there are limits to what women can achieve, she said clearly. That intelligence in a woman is unfeminine, that ambition is unbecoming, that your worth is measured primarily by your ability to attract an advantageous marriage, and perhaps some of those limitations are real for now. But limitations exist only until someone refuses to accept them, only until someone stands up and says, I am more than what you've decided I can be. She paused, meeting each young woman's eyes in turn. I was once told I would always be the second choice, that I would never be seen, never be valued, never be chosen for who I actually was, and I believed it for far too long. But the truth is that I was never anyone's second choice. I was simply surrounded by people too limited to recognize my value. When the right person finally saw me, everything changed, not because he rescued me, but because his recognition gave me permission to rescue myself. How did you do it, Your Grace? Asked a young woman in the front row. How did you find the courage to step out of the shadows? Lucinda considered the question carefully. I realized that invisibility was its own kind of prison, that hiding protected me from cruelty, but also prevented me from living fully. So I made a choice, to be seen completely, even if that meant being judged, criticized, or rejected. Because the alternative, staying invisible forever, was no longer acceptable. She looked around the room, seeing hope and determination in young faces that reminded her so much of her younger self. You are all first choices, she continued, not because of beauty or social position or who your families are, but because you have minds that refuse to be diminished. You have voices that insist on being heard. You have courage that propels you forward, even when society insists you step back. Use that. Build on that. Refuse to accept anyone's assessment of your limitations, except your own. After the young women departed, Julian joined her in the empty drawing room. Excellent speech. You've inspired an entire generation of formidable women who are going to terrify London society. That's the goal, Lucinda smiled. Though I suspect London can handle it. Society is more adaptable than people assume, especially when forced to confront its own contradictions. Speaking of confronting contradictions, I ran into Lady Celestine at Parliament today. She's become quite the political hostess, apparently. Wanted me to convey her regards. How diplomatic of her. Indeed. I got the impression she's made her peace with how things unfolded. Her marriage seems solid, and she's found her niche managing her husband's political ambitions. Different path than yours, but not unhappy. Good. I never wanted her to be miserable. I just wanted to be free. Julian pulled her close and Lucinda relaxed into his embrace, marveling at how natural it felt, how completely safe she felt in this life they'd built together. You know what I'm most grateful for? He said quietly. That I was paying attention that night, that I noticed the woman everyone else overlooked, that I had the sense to recognize intelligence and authenticity when I encountered it. I'm grateful you refused to accept my stepmother's denials, that you pushed back, investigated, and offered me a choice rather than another cage. We're quite the mutual admiration society. We are, and I wouldn't have it any other way. That evening, as Lucinda prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about the narrative arc of her life. The girl who had been told she would always be the second choice. The woman who had discovered that being chosen by the right person, for the right reasons, was worth every moment of waiting in shadows. She had been the second choice to people whose judgment didn't matter, but she had been the first, the only choice to the person whose judgment did. And in the end, that was everything. London society had adjusted to the Duchess of Thornbury's presence with characteristic adaptability. She was considered eccentric but influential, brilliant but approachable, powerful but purposeful. Her charitable work inspired imitation among other society ladies who wanted to be seen as progressive. Her writing influenced conversations about women's education and social reform. Her marriage was held up as an example of genuine partnership rather than convenient transaction. But Lucinda's greatest satisfaction came from smaller victories. The young woman who wrote to thank her for a scholarship that changed her life. The girl who chose education over an arranged marriage because Lucinda's example showed it was possible. The whispered conversations at balls where women discussed ideas instead of merely gossip. She had stepped into light, and in doing so, had illuminated a path for others. "You're changing London," Catherine told her during one of their afternoon walks. The dowager was older now, her step slower, but her mind still razor-sharp. Not dramatically, not overnight, but steadily and substantially. Women have options now that didn't exist 5 years ago, and much of that is because you refused to stay invisible. I had help, your protection, Julian's support, resources that many women don't have access to. True, but you chose to use those resources for something beyond personal comfort. That's what makes you remarkable, Lucinda. Not that you survived difficult circumstances, but that you transformed survival into purpose. The observation settled around Lucinda like a warm cloak. Purpose. Yes. That was what she'd found in the years since that first conversation with Julian at the Ashworth ball. Not just freedom, not just love, but purpose. A reason to be visible that went beyond her own liberation. As the sun set over London, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Lucinda stood on the terrace of Thornbury House and reflected on the impossible distance she'd travelled. From the girl who had learned to exist in silence to the woman who spoke with authority. From the daughter who had been systematically erased to the Duchess who made her presence unmistakable. From the second choice to the first choice to the only choice that mattered. She had been seen and in being seen had become fully herself. And that, ultimately, was the greatest transformation of all. Dear listeners, thank you so much for joining us on Lucinda and Julian's journey from recognition to love to purpose. If this story of courage, transformation, and choosing to be seen resonated with you, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to Echoes of Romance so you never miss a story. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. We love hearing from you, and your insights always add richness to these narratives. Give us a like if you enjoyed Lucinda's triumph over those who tried to erase her, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you'll be the first to know when we share our next tale of hearts finding their way home. Your support means everything to us, and we're so honored you chose to spend this time with us. Until next time, may you always have the courage to step into your own light.